want to talk about this whole idea of student loan forgiveness, which is like the hottest topic on the planet right now. And everybody's like, should I pay off my loans or should I wait for the loan to be forgiven?
Mm-hmm.
And it drives me bananas because there are people right now who are taking on loans assuming they will be forgiven. And that is dangerous.
Right.
It's dangerous because, again, it's part of that risk assessment that we always talk about. It's like it might be, but things change all the time. And there were a lot of people who thought their things would be forgiven a lot of years ago who are still hanging on, and rules change and governments change and all kinds of things change. And so I think what we have to look at when we're looking at student loans is not like, will this be forgiven or not? It's like, we have to look at it with the lens of what is the return on this investment.
I have a terrible story to share with you.
Okay.
By terrible, I mean, I have not stopped laughing. I was awake in the middle of the night last night. I feel like it was, I don't know, 3 a.m., which is typical for me now to just be wide awake for zero reason. And I thought about this story and I giggled like out loud, like noise came out of me because I thought about this story. Okay. You know that I love pranks just in general, right?
I know you. And actually, I do have to say, one of the things I love about you is that you love pranks, but that you don't play them on me generally. That is like, I can tell how hard that is for you. So I do appreciate that.
Well, one of the things though that falls like in the prank category for me is like scaring my family. So if Nick is coming in the door like from a long day of work and I happen to be there, I'm not searching out, like I'm not like following on Find My iPhone and standing by the door to scare him. But if I am like just around the area and I hear him coming up the stairs, I will just stand there and wait for him to open the door and then like give him a little spook.
Right. What good relationship isn't built on
Okay,
scaring the
but
crap out of each other?
here is the thing about me though, is that I love doing this to my family members,
Yes.
but I am a complete and total hypocrite and hate when they do it to me. And if they do it to me, I have been known to like punch them. Okay, but they still think it's funny and they will occasionally also do the same to me. Okay, so that's just a little bit of history for you
Yep.
before we dive into what's happened. So this weekend, we are in this mall in our town that's not very busy. So the mall's pretty quiet. We went there specifically for a store. There happens to be like a clothing store in there too. So we stop in the clothing store. This is all four of us are out doing this. And the clothing store has men and women stuff. And I find like a sweatshirt. This is what I wear every day, people, is a sweatshirt. I'm like, oh, I better try the sweatshirt on and see if the sweatshirt fits me. So I go into the change room, and their change room is one of those ones that has like, it's just like a half door, right? Like it's like it's open at the top, it's open at the bottom. And I go into the change room and I try on the top, and then I see under the bottom of the door white sneakers. And I'm like, oh, like that is my son. And he is standing there and he's ready to spook me and scare me when I come out of this change room. I'm like, not today, friend. Not today. I'm like, I so got you. I reach under the door with my foot, like I have to lean super far, and I boop right on the foot. And then I start laughing. However, the noise that came out of the person that was standing there was not my son's. I booped a stranger.
Did you say boop when you did it?
I booped. Erin, you don't understand. I had to like lunge. I had to do a full lunge to get out and tap my foot onto this person's like sneaker standing out there. I totally booped them. I thought it was my son. And the lady that was out there just went, ooh. And it was right then that I died in that stall. I died. I started laughing, but I didn't want to laugh out loud. Do you know how hard it is to not laugh when something is that freaking funny? And then I'm like, well, I live here now because I can never come
You
out.
can't get out. You had to just wait her out.
So it turns out like there's a mirror on the outside. So she must have been standing there, like holding something up to herself. So she
Oh,
was like looking at herself in the mirror of my stall. And I thought it was my son there to scare me.
I just try something on. All of a sudden, this foot comes out and
Exactly. Can you imagine if you'd been standing there and someone in the change rooms, like their foot comes.
That's terrible and amazing. That is amazing. How long did you have to wait in the stall?
So
She
I
must
waited a
be long.
very like I waited long enough that my family was like, "Are you okay in there?" Like they actually came over looking for me and I'm still laughing. I'm still laughing. And then I came out because I was like, I can't stay in here anymore. I'm like, this lady's got to be gone. So it turns out the only other people that are in the store are like this little old lady and her daughter, and they were trying on sweatshirts or something too, I guess. And I don't know if it was the old lady or the daughter, but I went and hid. Like I was hiding behind racks and everything. And I'm like peeking over, waiting for them to get out because I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Should I go over and apologize for the boop? I don't know. I don't know the right thing, but also I felt like I would just laugh if I did. So if that was you, I'm so sorry. Um, but also I'm still laughing.
I just want to give a boop, a big old boop to everybody who has rated and reviewed the podcast recently. It matters so much. It's such a simple thing you can do for us, and it's so kind. And just, I know what it's like when people ask you, please subscribe, rate, and review. But it's so helpful. And it's allowed us to stay commercial free. It's allowed us to really reach a lot of people, especially women, with fun financial literacy. And I'm just so grateful for all of you who've bothered.
Here's a good one. This one comes from LA Cause. I'm so sorry, all of you people, but you don't use your real names when you put these things in here. So I don't know what your names are, but
Yeah, because maybe if they're going to give us 1 star, they don't want us to chase them down.
no, but she gave us 5 stars and she says
Aw,
it's the best.
boop, boop for 5 stars.
Everything's gonna be a boop. Oh, she says, I've been struggling with my finances for a while when I accidentally stumbled upon the Get the Hell Out of Debt podcast. Hey, side note, do you know why she stumbled upon the Get the Hell Out of Debt podcast? Because other people rated and reviewed the podcast.
Thank
Uh,
you.
she says, I was immediately hooked. The conversations were funny and charming, but the subject matter was honest and informative. Erin is able to break down issues that seem complex into bite-sized ideas and practical action steps. There are no shoulds here. Listeners are treated as adults who are capable of understanding their past experiences and able to choose new outcomes. I look forward to each episode and frequently find myself laughing so hard, others wonder what I'm doing. Do yourself and your future self a favor and tune in as soon as possible. I love the idea of this person giggling to themselves, and it's because of our dumb things,
Yeah,
my dumb stories, my boop story.
that's right. And I love that she called us charming. I'm like, wow, that's a stretch, but thank you.
Said no one ever.
No one ever. We're going to talk today about the type of loan that I hate the most. Any guesses?
I hate the most, but you hate them all, don't you?
True. Okay, unfair question. Unfair question. The type of loan that I really don't like, however, though, is student loans. And I get asked about them all the time. And there's such a source of contention among a lot of people because there are people who believe student loans are necessary
Mm.
and a part of growing as an adult. And how else do you get a good paying job and whatever? And there are other people who I've seen really hurt financially by student loans for a lot of years. And so I'm sort of stuck in this place of, should I say what I really think, which of course is yes, right?
Yes.
I'm going to. Okay, fine, I'm going to.
Yes.
Just
Spoiler alert.
I just don't want to. And it's because I think sometimes it's such a sacrifice that a lot of people make to go to post-secondary, and it sort of becomes their identity. Like, I'm going to be an engineer, right? So it's like, I am an engineer, or I am a fine arts major, or I am a pediatrician, or it becomes part of their identity. And therefore they tie the student loan with their identity. And so then when I insult the student loans in the student loan industry, they're like, how dare you? It made me who I am. And I want to be like, Bish, the student loan did not make you who you are. And oftentimes, depending on where you live in the world, that whole practice can be very predatory. And so I'm going to just say all that with like, this might trigger you and it might offend you today. But princess, we are above that. And avoiding our triggers does not make us stronger. And if we're going to learn today, we're going to be really tough and we're going to have hard conversations and we're maybe going to discover new things or we're going to think new things.
I love this. First of all, I like when you do a disclaimer at the beginning of episodes where you're like, listen, I'm going to lay it out for you here and you might not like it. Those are my favorite episodes. Okay,
Every,
go. What do you got to say? Go.
every episode, if we're honest. Well, okay. So student loans are different depending on where you live in the world. Okay. But I want to talk about this whole idea of student loan forgiveness, which is like the hottest topic on the planet right now. And everybody's like, should I pay off my loans or should I wait for the loan to be forgiven?
Mm-hmm.
And it drives me bananas because there are people right now who are taking on loans assuming they will be forgiven. And that is dangerous.
Right.
It's dangerous because, again, it's part of that risk assessment that we always talk about. It's like it might be, but things change all the time. And there were a lot of people who thought their things would be forgiven a lot of years ago who are still hanging on, and rules change and governments change and all kinds of things change. And so I think what we have to look at when we're looking at student loans is not like, will this be forgiven or not? It's like, we have to look at it with the lens of what is the return on this investment. Do you want more? I know you do. Why wouldn't you want more? More
More
of this,
what? What do I want more of?
more of this. Come
Oh,
hang out in the online course, Forget the Hell Out of Debt. The link is in the description. You just got to click it, sign up, and we'll see you in there.
shouldn't we
I've,
also like plan for worst case scenario versus best case scenario?
yeah, that's exactly what risk is, right? Is we always want to look. I think most of us look at student loans as if like, oh, this is going to be the thing that helps me bring in more income. And that might be true. But when we bring in more income, sometimes that means other things, right? Now you've got this high paying job in your city center that requires you to pay $400 a month for parking and requires you to have a dry clean only wardrobe and requires you to eat out and entertain and all of these other things, have a, certain style of hairdo or look to you, certain amount of Botox, depending on your age range, right? Like, so there's all of these other things that sometimes come with a higher income that we're not factoring in. And most importantly, the interest on those student loans.
Mm-hmm.
I have this friend who I got into like an argument with one time because she said all school is valuable for the experience. And she'd had such a really great school experience. She said it molded me and shaped me and made me who I am. And I think that's true until you're a grown up and you're 50 years old and you're making student loan payments and the balance isn't going down. Like that happens depending on how some loans are structured. I don't disagree that post-secondary is very valuable. You and I both went to the same post-secondary school. It's how we met, kind of. We sort of met, but then we ended up working in the same place. But we, recognized each other's faces from school. Was school valuable even without the education?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. Like there were so many things just about life that I learned while I was there.
Yeah. Like you moved away,
Yeah,
learned how to lie to your parents about where you were.
absolutely.
Yeah. There's learned how to make Ichiban last for 3 weeks if you had to, right?
Learned
All
how to do a keg stand.
learned.
I still can't do that actually, just for to be clear. Never did actually learn that.
So there are a bunch of different types of student loans, right? There's federal student loans, which have typically been idealized, depending on the country you live in, as the least expensive student loans, right? And then there's private student loans. And most student loans operate on something called simple interest, but some loans have compound interest. And one of the things that we always look at when we don't have financial literacy is we look at what is the interest rate. But sometimes calculating the way the interest is compounded and how often it's compounded means a lot worse things than the interest rate. So you can end up paying out a lot more money on something that's a lower interest rate if that interest is compounded a certain way. And that's something that most people don't know. And it's such a huge source of frustration because then sometimes people will then refinance a student loan into a lower interest rate thinking they're getting a better deal, and it's actually compounding things even worse.
Right.
So two types of interest when it comes to student loans. Simple interest, that's calculated based on the loan amount you originally borrowed. And then there's compound interest, which is calculated based on your loan amount plus any unpaid interest that is accrued. So compound interest essentially charges interest on your interest.
Gross.
Gross. I know. It's compound interest is phenomenal when
Yeah,
you
when it's
investment.
working in your favor. Yeah, I know exactly. I love compound interest when it's
I just
working for me.
feel like I want to put a cap and gown on you right now and celebrate your
Yeah.
graduation.
Look at all the things I've learned since we started this podcast. Look at all of my learning.
Feel so Okay. And it didn't cost you any student loans. Okay. So here's the deal. If your loans are subsidized, you're not responsible for paying the interest that accrues while you're in school. If your loans are unsubsidized, you're responsible for all of the interest that accrues, even while you're in school.
Mm.
And so here's this piece that a lot of people miss. Okay, brace yourselves, brace yourselves. During periods of time when you're not required to make payments, because sometimes when you're in school, they're like, oh, you don't have to pay this back as long as you're a student, right? As long as you're in school. So that can be whether you're in school or in deferment or in forbearance, your interest will still accrue, daily interest or compounded, or accumulate if it's compounded, and in certain instances will be capitalized, which means it gets added back to the principal amount of the loan. So you might not be making payments now, but the interest is still doing its thing.
Ouch.
Yeah. And whether your unpaid interest capitalizes or not, you are still responsible for paying the interest that accrues. So you can always choose to pay the interest even when you're not required to make a payment. That's important to know.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that oftentimes, especially if you are working part-time while you're going to school, it can be beneficial to pay the interest accrual as you're going so that it doesn't end up being this huge thing that piles up. So I can't state this enough. This is like if I was typing this in an email to you, it would be all caps. You do not have to make a payment, but it is still accruing if it is simple interest or if it is compounding.
Got it. All caps, underlined, bold, and 16-point font.
I would go with 20. Like I would make it
Ooh.
so big you need 4 pages. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Scotch tape them together. Yeah. So no payment you make goes towards any of your loan principal until you've paid all your unpaid interest. And that's important to know because some people will come out and they'll be like, I've been paying my student loan payment for 10 years and the balance hasn't gone down.
Mm-hmm.
It's highly likely they're not paying any of the principal. So you're just making interest payments the whole time. It's like, it's bananas that that's legal.
Mm-hmm.
Under any income-driven repayment plan, your monthly payment amount may sometimes be less than the amount of interest that accrues on your loans, and that's called negative amortization, meaning you're never going to pay it off. When your monthly payment, let me say that again.
Yeah, I do. I'm trying. My brain was trying to compute that. I'm gonna need a diagram. I got it. You got to get out the overhead projector. And if you could please put that down in writing for me.
I think nowadays they use a smart board.
I know they do, but my day is overhead projector.
Do you remember when on the overhead projector, 9 times out of 10, the teacher would put it up the little piece of clear paper upside down first, and then they had to like put it right side up?
I can still hear like the noise it makes when you're flipping the papers over. I can
Yeah.
totally still. The best thing about that is that you had to dim the lights in the room. So if you wanted to have like in order to be able to see it at all. So if you wanted to catch like a few Z's
Yeah.
when the overhead projector was out, that's when you could have a nap.
Yep. What did they do with all those? Those were plastic. They
I
definitely didn't recycle those, did they?
Probably not. They're in a junk pile somewhere.
If you go digging through a landfill right now, you could probably get a
Yeah.
PhD. Okay. Under any income driven repayment plan, meaning like if you make X amount of dollars, this is what you're going to pay. If you make X amount of dollars, this is your payment, right? Your monthly payment amount may sometimes be less than the amount of interest that accrues on your loan. So that's called negative amortization. So what that's doing is it's actually taking your loan and extending it out. The amortization refers to the length of the loan before it's unpaid.
Mm-hmm.
So you might have a loan that won't be paid for 200 years. You might be dead before that loan is paid off. So watch if you have an income-driven repayment plan that your payments are at least over and above the amount of interest that accrues and that you're making payments on the principal of the loan to pay it down. The other thing is that's so weird about student loans is that in many parts of the world, they're qualified based on your parental income. So whether or not you can get a student loan depends on what kind of income your parents earn. This gets really tricky for people who have complex relationships with parents
Yeah.
or parents that maybe aren't great tax filers
Mm.
or parents that maybe had a really good 2023, like maybe a huge bonus payment from 2022. Mom and dad got paid on their income in 2023. So it showed up in their 2023 taxes. But then in March 2023, they lost their jobs and they've been unemployed ever since. But because that showed up on their 2023 taxes in 2024, when you go to get your student loan, the government's like, sorry, it looks like your parents have a lot of money. They should help you. And they can't. So they got to go private. You know what I mean? There's just like lots of reasons that it's bollocks.
Wait, do you need your parents' permission? Like, do they actually have to provide their information, or if me applying for a student loan, they can then just go look at what my parents submitted for their taxes?
In some parts of the world, well, no, it's like a different agency, right? It's not like you're calling the government tax bureau for a student loan, but in some parts of the world, depending on where you live, your parental income is one of the things that determines how much student loan you can get. So it's unfair to you as the student, especially if you don't have a relationship with, like, let's say mom and dad split up, dad's abandoned you and hasn't talked to you and whatever, and he's got another family over here, but he's filing his taxes and they're really high. You haven't talked to him for whatever reason, and they're like, sorry, you can't get a student loan. Well, you're handcuffed now.
Mm.
There's all kinds of reasons. I just don't think that should be a thing. I don't think your student loan situation should at all be at your finances. If they say you're old enough to be on your own financially, I think that should mean that you're on your own financially and you, on your own merit, should get the loan. And I think it should be based on the type of program that you get, but that's another story for another day. Some countries do that. Now, student loan forgiveness, it depends, and it depends where you live. Like, for example, in Canada, the maximum amount forgivable is about 50% for doctors or nurses.
The only those two?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
In the US, if you're public service, teacher, or in healthcare, there can be loan forgiveness, sometimes like full loan forgiveness, depending on, all the circumstances. But we don't want to say, oh, you know what? I think I want to be a nurse because maybe I'll get my loan forgiven. But that's how a lot of people are making these decisions now. So we have to be really mindful that we're actually going in to do something that we might like to spend our days doing
Yes.
before we decide
I
on
don't want to be in a hospital, Erin, with a doctor that doesn't actually want to be there, that chose to be a doctor because he's getting a discount on his loans. That's not the doctor I want.
There was a really great TikTok I stumbled across a couple weeks ago, and it was showing students who were interested in med school a C-section video. And
Oh.
the video was just facing the students, like it wasn't showing what they were watching and their faces. It was great. I was like, this is genius. They need to be like, oh, you want to be a doctor? Let's just show you what a day on the job looks like.
Smart.
There were some people who made alternate decisions that day.
I bet.
So here's the deal. If you have a kid that is graduating, I want you to make certain that they are certain about what they want to study. Now, you might come from a family of doctors and you might be like, but everyone in our family is a doctor. Please do not do that to your kids. So if you have kids that are graduating, make sure they're certain about what they want to study. Like, if you come from a long line of doctors and you want your kid to be a doctor, make sure your kid actually wants to be a doctor. Okay. Whatever your kids end up studying, they can be wrong and change, but we don't want them burning through cash on a general studies tour of all the faculties. If you want them to have a college experience while they figure it out, they can do part-time classes, they can work on campus, they can get another part-time job somewhere else and do both classwork and work until they know for sure what it is that they want to do. And it gives them good time at practicing managing their own money.
Mm. What about the people that say, well, they just need to go because they can't take a break? If you don't go right after high school, then you're never going to go. And so it's better to go and take some general studies just so that you're staying in the educational loop.
Why don't you put out that cigarette, Marjorie, and pull up a chair and I'll bring you all the way to 2024. That's really adorable advice. When the world was different.
Mm.
I don't think that's the case anymore. We literally live in a society of lifelong learners now. People aren't doing one thing that they're taking in university or college and then doing that career for 40, 50 years, retiring with a gold watch. And like people are constantly updating their skills. The internet has made so many forms of education so accessible. And so that assumption gets really dangerous. Now, certainly there are some kids who will find their way in the world and not go to college, but then did they need to?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's a mistake to believe that the only way to earn a high income is to get a post-secondary education. We all know someone who earns a very high income without a post-secondary education. And we all know people who have post-secondary educations who are broke.
Yeah. Good point.
And so we have to get out of this old mentality of that, because that did used to be the way. But your ability to earn depends on so much more than your education. You can have the best degree or like a really high paying degree and you can be lazy.
Mhm.
Or you can have a degree in fine arts and have some drive behind you. I look at our friend, you and I have a friend who's an artist, Cal. Can we talk about
Mhm.
her behind her back, do you think? Think she'll be
Yeah.
offended?
No, we'll just send this to her and she can listen.
Okay. So Cal is one of my favorite artists. Her art, like I buy her prints and they're in what's interesting about Cal is you buy one print from Cal and she sends you two. I don't know how that happens. They're like gremlins. She like so over delivers. But my whole house is full. And I just love everything she does. I'm a mega fan of hers. But she is somebody who has made it a career.
Yes. Yeah.
And she's somebody who's genius and strategic and thoughtful, but you know what I mean? And she does better, I would assume. I don't know, Cal, we're open to being wrong, right? But she does better than a lot of people who have jobs that they go to that they hate every day,
Mhm.
that they come home from, they complain, and they sit in front of the TV for 4 hours, drink a beer, pass out, and do it all again.
Mhm. Her job right now, did you see, is she's painting the side of a building right now, like doing a mural on the side of the building in her town where she lives.
She's so cool. She's
That's
so
her job.
smart.
She said something on a story recently where she was like, "This is my job." And I'm like, "You have the coolest job." She's like, "I know."
I know, I know. But you know what I mean? Cal has
And oh, I was just going to say, and Cal and I met because we went to college together. We met in college our very first semester. She came from her small town. I came from mine. We met up. We only ever lived together for one semester. But to your point, she didn't stay doing that. She was like, this isn't for me. And already she knew. She's like, nope, I'm out. I'm going to go do something else.
genius. So one doesn't necessarily mean the other, though it might have way back in 1960 or 1970. But back then, you would have only had two choices anyway. You would have been allowed to be a nurse or a teacher. So take your pick. Your vagina limited you.
I don't want either of those jobs ever.
So your ability to interview matters. How much drive you have, ultimately, what you want for a career path and what you're willing to do to obtain it matters so much more than the degree you have. And I think, when we look at highly educated people who make no money, it's not usually because they aren't educated, right? They have the education. It's like right there in their degree. They just don't have the education around finances and money, which is, if you're listening to this podcast, this is what you're getting.
Mhm.
And so it's hard unless you've gone out to try and get a job yourself. Like it's hard to really know if you're going to have an ROI by going to school or not. But sometimes by getting out there and getting a job, you might get an entry level job somewhere in a company where you're like, I actually really like it here. And in order to move up in this company or a company similar, because I don't think you should stay at the same company necessarily always either. But in order to get the next level for this, I am going to need an education. But right now I'm earning 30 grand a year. And to get that job, I'm going to make 70 grand a year and it's going to cost me 12 grand in tuition. Well, now we have an actual ROI. Now
Mhm.
we know what we're going to trade in order to get somewhere else. And we're going to be able to figure out how long it's going to take us to pay off that 12,000 on a $70,000 income because we're going to have a better idea. Now there's no guarantees, of course, and you could change your mind and all kinds of things could happen, but at least we have a starting point. Whereas when you're fresh out of high school, you don't often have a clue.
Mhm. Okay, what do we do instead then? What are our alternatives here? What do you recommend that we do?
Okay. So if money's tight, you're going to try and cash flow as much of the education as possible, or your student is going to try and cash flow as much of the education as possible. So that means working before school starts on holidays, like, spring breaks and things like that. And they're going to have some skin in the game. I think there's a big difference between the success of the kids who work for their education and the success of the kids who are given their education. So I say that, and hopefully it lets you off the hook for parents who feel guilty that they didn't save for their child's education. It doesn't necessarily make their education better. So having them participate in it can be really important. And if they're going to do like a 4-year degree, it gives you both 4 years to figure out how you're going to manage the step. And if
Mhm.
you get yourself into a position where you're at a debt in a year and a half and you start building wealth and doing all other kinds of things, you can always reward your kid like a year after they've worked and they've understood what it's like to sacrifice and pay rent or manage a vehicle and all, groceries and all of those things. If they've done really well or haven't done well, you don't have to promise them anything, but you could provide them a giant check a year after they graduate and be like, here, let this pay off your student loans as my gift to you, right? Like you
Mhm.
could do something really big like that.
Yeah,
If you're going to try,
you had that advice before, and I thought that was so smart. It was someone had written into us and asked us about how to help their kid who wants to go to this expensive college, but they're in debt themselves. And you were like, no, no, this is not your problem. You've got to manage the debt first, and then absolutely help them, but they can do this themselves and should do it themselves basically so that they are doing all the learning at the same time as you are.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the student loans, whatever you can get, as long as you're watching, the interest and the compounding or the accrual and what that rate is like and how often it's because some student loans are compounding daily, simple
Mhm.
interest, but they're compounding daily. Okay. So just make sure you know something called the total cost of borrowing. What is this? If you're borrowing 5 grand, what is it actually going to cost you? 20 grand, 50 grand? Like, what's that cost you in total dollars? Okay. So you're going to take that student loan as early as you can get it and try not to use it on IKEA furniture and, you know,
Ugh,
learning how to
you
do a keg stand, Carrie
you
Blakeney.
just like ruined everything. I mean, I feel like that was the first thing that I did with my student loans is that I paid tuition and then went to the mall.
Listen, I am the pot calling the kettle black here because I got a nose job with mine. So all of this is coming from experience. Okay. This is not me being holier than thou. I've made mistakes too. Okay. So
I sure don't have those jean shorts anymore. Those jean shorts are long gone.
you're going to take that lump sum student loan that you're getting, if it's a lump sum. Now, sometimes, depending on where you're getting the loan from, you have to pay it directly to the school, and there's all kinds of stipulations. But if it's not a loan that you have to pay directly to the school, you're going to take it and you're going to put it in a high interest savings account, and you're going to watch the interest accrual versus the interest you're earning on the savings, and you're going to do your best not to spend anything out of it. And hopefully, you can come up with enough grind and enough, spirit. And when I say you, I mean your kid, in order to make ends meet, getting a job on campus, helping out, applying for every scholarship possible, applying for every grant possible, talking to Rich Aunt Edna and seeing if she wants to help invest in your education, all kinds of things you can do, right? Anything that you can do to not have as many student loans as possible. And what a lot of people do is they're like, oh, I qualify for student loans. They take out all the student loans they can and they think, I'll deal with this later when I'm making more money.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know the amount of money they're going to be making and they aren't paying attention to the total cost of borrowing, so they never get out of it. So ideally, you're going to have that lump sum money somewhere. And if not, that's okay. You're going to have to pay it to the school or whatever, but you're going to track it always. It's going to go on your net worth spreadsheet, not when you start paying it back, but now. Because if for some reason you drop out, you've got to still pay that loan back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something crazy like 75% of what's the word for loans that aren't paid?
Uh, 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 Default.
Default. 75% of loans that go into default are from people that have dropped out of school.
Oof.
And that has massive repercussions on your ability to have a credit score if that's important to you, or sometimes even get a better paying job. Some jobs, depending on what it is you want to do and what field you want to work in, your credit score is important to the job application. So it's just that thing that we just want to be really on top of it. We don't want to imagine, oh, student loans, I'll deal with them later. I'll deal with them later. The minute you decide to go to school, you need to be paying attention to your finances today, but also what you anticipate them being down the road.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember anything that you learned? Do you still use any of those things from that first year of college?
I dropped out of the initial program that I was in and I
Uh-huh.
moved over to broadcasting school. So
Mhm.
I didn't have the best first year, to be honest. I was going through a lot of things and it was tough. I didn't have any money. And then I moved and I was paying my way through school by teaching step aerobics
Mhm.
and spin class, which is really funny now that I have a Peloton in my basement and I have to pay a certain amount every month to somebody in New York to teach me how to use it. But I used to pay my way through school teaching fitness while I was doing my broadcasting. And I remember I took 3 years to do the program, which was a 2-year program, because I stopped and worked full time for a year in between. Because again, money was tight and I wanted to do it without a huge, I was already in the hole, but I wanted to kind of get ahead of things. But I do remember like Mark Jacinda and
Yep.
Al Lamb, the two greatest instructors that I had that I can recall, and who were so kind and so good, who I think took one look at me and thought, this girl is struggling. She's a little lost. She's, and they just, I don't know, in a smaller program like that where they can just pour into you and they can note it. Like I think about my first year when I was at university, I was lost in these giant lecture halls of 400 kids and like just faded away and I wasn't doing well. But I do remember when I went to the broadcasting program, which I was much better suited for. I still love pushing all those buttons on a board, When I go do a big event in a stadium and lighting guy and the music guy let me play I just love pushing all the buttons and fading the music and making the lights go to the beat of the song and all that stuff. But anyway, that's what I'm using it for now, not broadcasting. But I think what I used out of all of that was just the adulting skills of how to have hard conversations, how to get to the truth, how to ask the questions that nobody else wants to ask. So there's still soft skills and stuff that I use, but if you were to sit me down and give me, a test on American media and the history of American media today, I would fail. I would get a solid F in that class, and I would be sober this time. So what do you remember? What did you use from school?
You know what? I was just thinking about how much time I wasted, and didn't seem like I was wasting it then. I loved every second of it.
Mhm.
I spent so much time in a dark room developing photos. I loved the classes that I went to that taught me how to do all of those things, but I would spend every waking minute in a dark room developing photos. Like, what a giant waste of time. Now,
I developed my first job was at a newspaper, and I was the darkroom photographer. I think I was about 9 years old when I started. This
yeah.
is like how could you imagine putting a 9-year-old in a room with three different types of chemicals?
Yeah,
Like,
right. This
and
is
they- no
explains a lot.
ventilation. It
This
does.
explains a lot, I think, for both of us. The amount of chemicals that we have inhaled and that have leached into our bodies just from those photo baths. That explains a
Welcome
lot, I feel.
to the Get the Hell Out of Debt podcast, where Erin Skye Blakeney and Carrie Blakeney, who together have only 3/4 of one brain, will teach you about money.
Did you hear yourself? You said Erin Skye Blakeney.
I told you.